Elizabeth Warren was 64 years old, and to most people in town she was just Miss Elizabeth, the quiet widow with the gentle voice and a slow, steady way of moving through life. She lived on the edge of a rural community tucked between a stretch of ancient pine forest and a wide, slow-moving river that seemed to breathe with the seasons. Her days were simple, just the way she preferred. Each morning she slipped into her worn sweater, laced up her walking shoes, and made her way to the riverbank. She followed the same dirt path her late husband Robert used to walk with her, a habit she kept even years after he passed. She didn't walk fast. She didn't rush. She listened. The wind through the trees, the soft rustle of fallen leaves, the distant call of morning birds. All of it filled the silence that had taken root in her life. People in town said that if you ever needed a cup of sugar, a listening ear, or a blanket sewn back together, Miss Elizabeth was the one you went to. Not because she had much, but because she gave what she had without hesitation. Her small garden behind the house still bloomed with fresh tomatoes and bell peppers in season. And every Sunday afternoon she left fresh-cut flowers on her husband's gravestone, always lilies, his favorite. Life was quiet, calm, predictable. But as she would soon find out, not finished. There were still things in the world capable of surprising her, of stirring something deep in her heart. And it would all begin on one of those peaceful walks by the river she thought she knew so well. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, the kind of morning when the air feels soft and cool, and the sunlight breaks through the trees in long, quiet beams. Elizabeth was walking her usual path along the riverbank, the path she had walked nearly every day for over 20 years, when she noticed something that made her stop mid-step. Just ahead, near the bend of the river, lay a large, still shape. At first she thought it might be a fallen tree trunk or the shadow of a boulder half covered in moss, but as she moved closer, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a rock, and it certainly wasn't a tree. It was a body, a massive body. Her first thought was that it must be a bear. Bears pass through the woods sometimes, especially during the colder months, searching for food before winter set in. But the closer she got, the more she realized this was different, much larger, longer, and heavier. The fur was not golden brown like the black bears she occasionally saw. It was dark, matted, tangled with mud and river water. And then she saw the face, half submerged in the shallow water, eyes barely open, chest rising only a little with each weak breath. Human-like but not human, wild and yet indescribably familiar. A deep cut along its shoulder oozed slowly into the river, staining the water red. She felt fear. Yes, the instinctive fear of being near something unknown, something powerful. But what settled in her heart more than anything else was sorrow, a sorrow so strong it drew her a step closer. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Instead, she knelt a few feet away and spoke softly, the same tone she once used to comfort her husband in his final days. "It's all right," she whispered. "I see you, and I'm not here to hurt you." Elizabeth stood there for several moments, staring at the enormous wounded creature lying helplessly in the river. Her heart pounded in her chest, but not from fear anymore, and from recognition. She didn't understand what it was or where it came from, but something about the heavy rise and fall of its chest, the quiet suffering etched in its eyes. It reminded her of a familiar pain, one she had seen in Robert's eyes near the end, a pain that wasn't meant to be faced alone. She slowly stood up and turned back toward her house, her step steady despite the tremor in her hands. At home, she didn't hesitate. She gathered a thick woolen blanket from the closet, a jug of warm water, 2 apples, and the last of the fresh bread she'd baked 3 days earlier. She wrapped it all in a basket and headed back to the river, her breath short but her purpose clear. When she arrived, the creature hadn't moved. Its breathing was shallow, its massive body still trembling slightly from cold and loss of blood. Carefully, Elizabeth placed the food on a flat rock nearby. Then she approached with the blanket, speaking softly as she went. "I know you're scared," she whispered, her voice calm and steady. "But you're not alone now. Not anymore." She dipped a cloth in the warm water and began gently wiping mud and dried blood from its fur, just as she had bathed her dying husband when he couldn't move for himself. Slow, tender strokes, no fear, just kindness. The creature watched her with fading eyes, its breathing unsteady, but it did not pull away. In that moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. No words, just two living beings sharing a simple truth. No one deserves to die alone. The first day she cleaned its wounds, Elizabeth didn't expect the creature to survive the night. She spent hours at the riverbank, talking, washing, placing the blanket gently over its massive frame until her knees stiffened and her hands ached. But she wouldn't leave until she felt sure it was sleeping peacefully. The next morning, she returned before sunrise with a thermos of warm broth, soft fruit, and boiled potatoes, simple food she hoped the creature could tolerate. She paused at a distance first, watching for signs of fear or aggression, but it didn't thrash or growl. It simply watched her, eyes open, calm, not with trust necessarily, but with an absence of fear. And that was enough. Day by day she tended to it, always quiet, always slow. She spoke to it in the same soothing tone she once used for her late husband when he drifted in and out of pain. Sometimes, when the creature was too weak to lift its head, she hummed soft songs from her childhood, the ones she used to sing while kneading dough in the kitchen. And something began to change. The creature started eating more. Not quickly, not greedily, but slowly, with intention. It never ate when she was sitting too close, as if giving her space out of respect. Once, when she placed food on a towel beside it, the creature gently nudged some of the leftover scraps toward her, not as a threat, but as if offering her a share. Other times, when Elizabeth sat down on the hard ground to rest her knees, she noticed the creature would shift its arm or leg just slightly, moving aside a rock or stick that might bother her. These subtle gestures didn't come from wild instinct. They came from awareness, from kindness. Over the course of those quiet days at the riverbank, no words were exchanged. Not one. But everything that needed to pass between them, trust, patience, comfort, traveled without speech. It wasn't a language made of sentences. It was one made of presence. And with every breath, every glance, every slow movement, the bond between them grew, not just as caretaker and wounded stranger, but as two living beings who understood what it meant to be hurt and still be cared for. As the days go by, Elizabeth becomes more familiar with the creature's body, its movements, and the silent way it responds to her care. One morning, as she changes the cloth on its side, she notices something she hadn't seen clearly before. A deep, jagged wound beneath the thick, matted fur. Not just a cut. It was too precise, too cruel. The size and shape of it make her heart sink. She leans in closer, lifting the fur with trembling hands. The edges are torn, bruised, dark. It looks like a gunshot or a trap meant to immobilize something bigger than a deer or bear. Her breath catches. Someone didn't just try to scare it. Someone tried to destroy it. She sits back on her heels, her knees aching from leaning on the cold grass, and stares at the creature. It watches her with soft, tired eyes that seem older than its body, heavy with a knowledge she can't begin to comprehend. The creature doesn't flinch as she gently places a hand over the wound. But she does. A quiet anger stirs inside her. Not anger at the creature. No, she has long stopped fearing it. The anger is for those who sought to harm it, for the senseless cruelty that left this giant, peaceful being crawling toward death by a lonely riverbank. "You didn't come to hurt anyone, did you?" she whispers, her voice thick. "You just wanted to live." The creature's chest rises and falls in slow, deep breaths. It doesn't understand her words, but it understands her tone. The same tone she once used when caring for her husband in his final days. A voice of grief disguised as comfort. A voice that speaks not to wounds, but to the soul. Elizabeth places the last bandage over the scar and sits beside it, her hand still touching fur that's slowly beginning to heal. For the first time in years, she feels she has purpose again, healing a creature nobody understood, and being understood by it in return. A full week has passed since Elizabeth first found the wounded creature by the river. Each day she rose early, bringing warm food, clean water, and gentle care, her presence becoming as constant as the rustling leaves and flowing current. She didn't expect anything in return. Just helping it survive had become enough. But on the 8th morning, something changed. The sun was just beginning to lighten the sky, dew still clinging to the grass like tiny crystals. Elizabeth walked her familiar path to the riverbank, this time with fresh bread, a small jar of broth, and a bundle of cloth. As she came near, she saw the creature, not lying down but rising. Slowly, every muscle quivering. Its massive form weakened but not defeated, rising to face dawn's first light. Elizabeth froze. Not out of fear, but awe. The creature stood taller than she imagined. Almost 8 feet, fur thick and dark. The bandages she applied still nestled against its wounded side. It swayed slightly, a hand reaching for a tree to steady itself. Then it turned to her. There was something in its eyes, something she struggled to name. Not just survival, not just gratitude. It was understanding, recognition. The same look her husband gave her the last time he had the strength to squeeze her hand. Elizabeth approached slowly, not daring to break the moment. She held out her hand, a gesture she had done dozens of times in silence, offering food, comfort, care. But this time the creature did something different. Its enormous hand, covered in rough hair, moved toward hers. Not quickly, not with strength, but with gentleness. A slow, deliberate touch against her fingers. A touch that said, "I know what you've done. I know what it cost you. I am alive because of you." Elizabeth swallowed hard, the moment filling her chest with something she hadn't felt in years. Connection, healing, loss being given somewhere to go. No words were spoken. Just shared life, shared grief, shared respect. The creature stepped back, eyes still on hers, then turned toward the forest. It disappeared into the trees, leaving Elizabeth standing in the morning light, a hand still outstretched, not empty, but full of what remains when love refuses to fade. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm. The river flowed the same. Birds sang the same gentle songs each morning. And yet, something in Elizabeth had changed. In the days that followed the creature's departure, she found herself walking the same path, not out of habit, but hope. There was no sign of the creature, no rustling in the brush, no footprints near the bank, no low groans in the wind. Just peace, stillness, but Elizabeth didn't feel abandoned. She didn't feel afraid either. Instead, there was a warmth that lingered inside her, something like quiet satisfaction, or maybe the relief of having done what she could when she was most needed. She tended her garden. She drank tea by the window. She even hummed more often while moving about the house, not out of joy exactly, but contentment. Then one morning, after a gentle rain, Elizabeth opened her front door to let in the fresh air. The steps were slick, leaves sticking in small clusters. But something caught her eye. A single smooth stone placed neatly on the top step. Just below the mat, it wasn't just any stone. It was familiar. The color, the weight, the faint line of quartz through its center. She had seen it before. She had picked it up herself from the riverbank the first day she cleaned the creature's wounds, held it in her hand while talking to him, thinking nothing of it. And now it had returned to her, not dropped, not kicked up by the wind, and carefully placed. Elizabeth knelt down, feeling the cool surface of the stone in her palm. Her heart beat slow but full. It hadn't left without a word. It just spoke differently. With a quiet breath, she carried the stone inside and set it on the small table beside her husband's old chair. Not a relic, not a memory, a message. I remember. The sun was dipping low behind the row of pines when Elizabeth settled into her old rocking chair on the porch. The smooth river stone rested in her hands, its cool surface warmed slowly beneath her palms. She stared past her garden, past the fence, into the quiet stretch of forest beyond, where shadows danced and memory lived. She didn't speak often these days. Silence felt richer, more full, but tonight, with the evening breeze stirring the leaves, she let her voice return soft and steady. "I helped you live," she said, eyes still fixed on the tree line, "and you helped me feel alive again." The words drifted out into the air. No one echoed them back. But they didn't need to. The message was for her just as much as it was for the creature she once saved. A creature who'd given something back without saying a single word. Elizabeth stood slowly, her joints stiff but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. She walked inside and placed the stone beside her husband's old walking cane, not as a replacement, not as something sacred, but as a symbol. A reminder of love in two different forms, of loss healed in unexpected ways. She turned back to the door and spoke one final time. Not to the forest, not to the past, but to whoever might hear. At 64, I thought nothing new could touch my heart. But life, even life we don't understand, has a way of finding us when we need it most. No proof to show. No photographs. No spectacle to boast about. Just a story. For those who still believe kindness has power,